We're here for an extensive exploration of one of the most defining and, I think, contradictory figures in 20th century American music, Johnny
It
Cash.
really
And the
was.
material we have here provides a phenomenal roadmap to understanding the artist, the man, and that balancing act he maintained between his faith and his outlaw reputation.
It's a study in paradox, isn't it? We're looking at the evolution of, well, J.R. Cash into the Man in Black. His persona was such a mix.
Right.
Part evangelical preacher, part working class hero, part rockabilly rebel. And what's really extraordinary is his success across so many different fields.
That success isn't just about album sales, though. I mean,
Yeah.
selling over 90 million records is incredible.
It is.
It's measured in his influence. You look at his resume, and it's almost unbelievable. Induction into 5 major music halls of fame.
That list is just staggering. You have the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
The Gospel Music Hall of Fame, Nashville Songwriters, and the Memphis Music Hall of Fame.
That kind of universal recognition is virtually unheard of. It tells you right away that his sound spanned rockabilly, folk, blues, country. It was so singular that no single genre could really claim him.
Absolutely. So our mission here is to trace that transformation. We want to understand how this Arkansas farm boy could become this global icon who, shook hands with presidents but always stood with the man behind bars.
And not just what he did, but why those contradictions were so central to his whole identity.
To begin, let's go back to the source. He was born J.R. Cash in Kingsland, Arkansas in 1932. And even his name was a sign of compromise, wasn't it?
It was. The initials JR were just a simple compromise. His mother, Carrie, wanted to name him John, and his father, Ray, wanted Ray.
So they just settled on the initials.
Exactly. But that simple beginning gave way to a deeply formative childhood when the family moved to Dyes, Arkansas, a few years later.
And this move is so critical to understanding his entire worldview. Dyes was part of Roosevelt's New Deal, established during the Great Depression. Can you expand on what that meant for the Cash family?
Certainly. Dyes was a government-subsidized agricultural colony. It was designed to give poor, landless families a path to some kind of economic stability.
So the government would assign them a plot of land.
Right, about 20 acres, a house, and they'd offer loans for livestock and equipment. But it wasn't charity. The families had to work the land and pay off those loans. The goal was ownership.
So he grew up knowing that struggle was just normal. The sources say that starting at age 5, he was out in the cotton fields with his family. That kind of labor must have ingrained in him a profound empathy for the working class.
And this hardship was compounded by terrible tragedy. That empathy was also rooted in immense personal grief. We have to talk about the death of his older brother, Jack, in 1944.
It's a heartbreaking story, and one Cash revisited his entire life. Jack was 2 years older and was horribly injured after falling into an unguarded table saw.
The incident was just horrific. He survived for over a week, but the injuries were too severe. The material we have suggests that Cash, his mother, and even Jack himself felt this strange foreboding about that day.
His mother had urged Jack not to go to work, right? To go fishing with Johnny instead.
She did. But Jack was so responsible, even as a boy. He insisted on going because he knew the family needed every single penny he earned.
That sense of guilt, it just never left Cash. He repeatedly spoke about looking forward to the day he would see Jack again in heaven. This trauma didn't just cement his faith, it created this whole narrative for his life.
A man surviving, struggling with guilt, always seeking some kind of atonement.
And at the same time, his musical foundations were being laid. The first influence was gospel, obviously. He later honored that with the album My Mother's Hymn Book.
But there was also a surprising influence, traditional Irish music. He heard it on the radio on the Jack Benny program. It just shows how wide his listening scope was, even out in rural Arkansas.
Then, before the music industry, the Air Force called. In 1950, J.R. Cash enlisted. And this is where he had to finally get a real first name.
Correct. The U.S. Air Force didn't allow recruits to use initials as a first name, so he officially became John R. Cash. He was honorably discharged 4 years later as a staff sergeant after serving in West Germany.
And his job there was pretty specialized. He was a Morse code operator, intercepting Soviet transmissions.
This part of his life really grounds him in Cold War history. It's documented that Cash was the first American on his base to learn the news of Joseph Stalin's death in March 1953.
Because he was the one who intercepted the message.
Exactly. His daughter, Roseanne, confirmed he told that story many times. It's just an amazing image. The future man in black, in a radio room in Germany, learning one of the biggest news stories of the century before almost anyone else.
He also formed his first band overseas, the Landsberg Barbarians.
Yeah.
When he came back, he married Vivian Alberto, and they moved to Memphis in '54. He hoped to be a radio announcer.
That didn't quite work out, so he was selling appliances, but he was relentlessly pursuing music with his new bandmates.
And those bandmates were Luther Perkins on guitar and Marshall Grant on bass. The Tennessee Two.
Later, the Tennessee Three, yeah. And that trio, that was his signature, sound stripped down, raw, and just so distinctive.
They took that sound to the legendary Sam Phillips at Sun Records. The audition story is famous, but we need to talk about why Phillips rejected his initial songs. Cash came in wanting to sing gospel.
Right. And Phillips was running a rockabilly and early rock and roll label. Gospel was, in his view, just not very marketable. The legendary line is that Phillips told him to go home and sin, then come back with a song I can sell.
Whether that quote is exact or not, the message was clear. Phillips wanted energy, something rebellious.
So Cash had to compromise his material, though not his faith. He came back with a new style with that signature driving rhythm that Luther Perkins had developed.
That boom-chicka-boom sound.
Exactly. It was Perkins using a finger-picking style on an electric guitar to create this repetitive, rhythmic bass line. It sounded like a chugging train. That minimalist beat just defined Cash's early sound.
And it worked right away. Hey, Porter, and Cry, Cry, Cry in 1955 were immediate successes. Then came Folsom Prison Blues, which made the country top 5, and then the massive I Walk the Line.
I Walk the Line was a #1 country hit, and it crossed over into the pop top 20. A huge deal.
By 1956, he's standing there with Titans. We all know that photo of the $1 Million Quartet session. Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Cash.
It's a snapshot of history. But Cash always pointed out he was literally standing the farthest from the microphone, singing in a higher pitch, just trying to blend in with Elvis.
It shows that even with all that success, he still sort of felt like an outsider. That feeling never really left him. So despite this explosive success, by 1957, Cash was already getting restless at Sun Records. Why would he want to leave the place where he found his sound?
Well, it was a business decision, but it was wrapped in a creative constraint. Sam Phillips was still telling him to avoid gospel music, which Cash felt a deep need to record.
And the money.
The money was the bigger issue. Phillips was paying Cash a really low 3% royalty rate. The industry standard at the time was 5%.
That's a huge difference, especially since he was the label's most consistent seller. Elvis was gone.
And Phillips seemed to be putting all his energy into Jerry Lee Lewis. Cash felt undervalued, so in 1958, he jumps to Columbia Records for a much better deal.
This created that strange situation where, for years, new music was coming out on both Sun and Columbia at the same time.
Right, because Phillips still owned that backlog of material. It went on until about 1964.
Now, as his professional career is soaring, his internal life is starting to collapse. The frantic touring schedule in the late 50s led him to heavy drinking and a really severe addiction to amphetamines and barbiturates.
This is where the foundation of that outlaw persona really starts to take shape, and it's fueled by self-medication. The amphetamines, like dextrine, were initially just to keep him awake on the road.
He even shared an apartment for a while with Waylon Jennings, who was going through a very similar struggle.
The pace was just unsustainable. The pills quickly took over. He said it perfectly later. I was taking the pills for a while, and then the pills started taking me. It became about survival, not just staying awake.
It was a very dark time. Erratic behavior, missed shows, just severe mood swings. And yet somehow, in the middle of all this, he's still producing incredible music.
Ring of Fire comes out in 1963 and becomes one of his biggest crossover hits, with that famous mariachi horn arrangement.
He claimed that horn part came to him in a dream, which is a great story. But the song itself reflects all the personal turmoil he was living through. It was co-written by June Carter and Merle Kilgore.
And that co-writing credit created a lot of tension in his marriage to Vivian Liberto. Vivian later claimed Cash only gave June credit for financial reasons.
Regardless, the song, which is all about being trapped in this burning hell of desire, it just encapsulated the growing closeness between him and June Carter and the collapse of his first marriage.
By 1966, that collapse was complete. Vivian filed for divorce. She cited constant touring, adultery, his drug and alcohol abuse, and of course, his relationship with June.
He had 4 daughters with Vivian: Roseanne, Kathy, Cindy, and Tara. A huge emotional burden for him.
Well, and the mid-60s became the peak of his quote-unquote outlaw activities. It's fascinating because he cultivated this image, but while he was arrested 7 times, he never served more than a single night in jail.
He racked up some truly infamous incidents. The most destructive was the Condor Fire in June 1965 in California. His camper caught fire and it burned over 500 acres of national forest.
It was a near-fatal disaster. He claimed it was a mechanical defect, but his nephew later suggested that Cash, high on drugs, was likely distracted and just didn't notice the fire until it was massive.
And when the judge asked him about it, he gave one of his most defiant replies. "I didn't do it, my truck did, and it's dead, so you can't question it."
The environmental damage was grim. The area was a refuge for the endangered California condor, and the fire drove off 49 of the 53 condors living there.
The government sued him, and he eventually settled for over $82,000.
And his response to the consequences was just pure rebellion. He reportedly said, "I don't care about your damn yellow buzzards."
It's a shocking quote, but it really underscores the chaotic state he was in. Just a few months later, he's arrested in El Paso, Texas.
Yeah, suspected of smuggling heroin from Mexico. They didn't find heroin, but what they did find was staggering. Almost 700 amphetamine capsules and nearly 500 sedatives hidden in his guitar case.
But because they were technically prescription drugs, he got a suspended sentence.
And then there's the famous Starkville, Mississippi arrest, which inspired a song.
Right, for trespassing late at night to pick flowers. It's almost comical compared to the other incidents, but it highlights his drug-fueled state. He wrote Starkville City Jail about it.
All these public humiliations finally led to an intervention really driven by June Carter and her family.
His low point came in 1967. His last arrest was in Lafayette, Georgia, after a car accident. He tried to bribe the deputy who found his pills.
And the deputy refused the money. That and a stern talk from the local sheriff, Ralph Jones, seemed to be the shock he needed to finally seek help.
Redemption became the only path forward. He rediscovered his Christian faith. And June Carter, she made her boundary clear. She would not marry him until he committed to getting sober.
He proposed to her on stage in London, Ontario in February '68, and they married a week later. June was his absolute anchor.
But it wasn't an instant cure.
No. Marshall Grant said it took another 2 years for him to really beat the amphetamines. June spent decades flushing his pills, getting him into treatment. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a partnership of immense sacrifice and constant management.
They had one son, John Carter Cash, and their marriage became the central narrative of his redeemed life. With his personal life finally stabilizing, Cash's professional identity began to shift from this troubled star to more of a moral icon. And one of the most striking tenets of this was his activism for Native Americans.
This was revolutionary for a mainstream country artist in the 1960s. Country music was, generally very conservative. He risked a huge backlash by dedicating an entire album, Bitter Tears, in 1964, to the mistreatment of indigenous people.
That album was fearless. It covered the history and the issues facing the Pima, the Navajo, Apache, Lakota,
The Seneca, the Cherokee. It detailed their oppression by settlers and broken government promises.
But the album's single, The Ballad of Ira Hayes, met intense resistance.
It did. Radio stations and a lot of fans found the topics too radical for country radio. His record label was reportedly hesitant to promote it.
But instead of backing down, he escalated. He took out a full-page ad, a letter, in Billboard magazine in August of '64.
And it was fiery. He called the industry cowardly for being afraid of the song. He argued that Ira Hayes was strong medicine, just like the civil rights struggles happening in Rochester, Harlem, and Birmingham, or the war in Vietnam. He basically told them they were afraid of reality.
And it worked. His star power was big enough that he could push back. The song eventually hit number 3 on the country charts.
And in 1966, the Seneca Nation formally adopted him into their Turtle Clan as a sign of respect for his commitment.
That commitment to the marginalized also found its greatest expression in his prison concerts.
He had been doing them since the late 50s, but the live albums Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison in '68 and at San Quentin in '69, they just exploded his career worldwide.
They captured this raw, electric energy. He spoke the language of the inmates, but he never moralized. He just signaled that he understood their struggle.
And that authenticity resonated globally. In 1969, because of those albums, he actually outsold the Beatles. He moved 6.5 million albums.
The San Quentin album gave him that huge crossover hit, A Boy Named Sue.
A novelty song, really, written by Shel Silverstein, but it went to number 2 on the pop charts. These concerts cemented his solidarity with the forgotten man.
It's interesting, because he hadn't served serious time, yet he became the voice of the penitentiary.
He achieved that by never pretending to be a hardened criminal. He positioned himself as a man who understood sin and temptation. He was sort of an honorary outlaw, respected for his troubles, not his crimes.
And after that success, He gets his own TV show, The Johnny Cash Show, on ABC from 69 to 71.
It was an incredible cultural bridge. He had the Carter family and Carl Perkins on as regulars, but the guest list was astoundingly diverse. Louis Armstrong, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, James Taylor.
He used his platform to introduce these countercultural figures to a mainstream audience, and he really championed Bob Dylan.
He did. He sang a duet with him on Dylan's Nashville Skyline album and even wrote the liner notes. He helped legitimize Dylan's move into country rock.
And he was willing to fight for his artists. The network executives tried to get him to censor Chris Christopherson's Sunday Morning Coming Down.
They wanted him to change the line about marijuana.
And he just flatly refused. On national television, he sang it, "I'm wishing, Lord, that I was stoned." It was this quiet act of rebellion that spoke volumes.
And all these elements, the activism, the prison solidarity, it was all encapsulated by his look, the man in black.
That all-black wardrobe was such a stark contrast to the rhinestone suits that dominated Nashville back then.
And it wasn't a fashion statement. He explained he wore black on behalf of the neglected, the poor and hungry, the prisoner, those betrayed by age or drugs. He was literally wearing the color of sorrow.
He even said he wore it in mourning for the lives lost in Vietnam, noting he saw plenty of darkness to carry off.
That image was so powerful, the U.S. Navy's old winter blue uniform, which was all black, was commonly called Johnny Cash's by sailors.
His conviction was really put to the test in 1970 when he was invited to perform for President Richard Nixon at the White House.
This was a classic test of his independence. Nixon's staff wanted to use his image for their own political ends. They asked him to play 2 specific songs.
Okie from Muskogee and Welfare Cadillac.
Exactly. Okie from Muskogee was a famous anti-hippie anthem, and Welfare Cadillac was a satire about people abusing welfare. They were very political requests.
And Cash saw right through it. He declined both songs. He said he didn't have time to rehearse them, but he later admitted that they conveyed anti-hippie and anti-black sentiments he just would not endorse.
So instead, he played The Ballad of Ira Hayes and Man in Black.
The defiance was palpable. Even Nixon joked about it, saying that he'd learned one thing. You don't tell Johnny Cash what to sing.
It's just a masterclass in maintaining your integrity, even inside the halls of power.
The 1980s opened with this huge honor. He was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, its youngest living inductee at just 48. But his commercial career started to enter a slump.
It did. The music industry had shifted, his record sales were lagging. Columbia Records, his longtime label, was getting frustrated.
He did find a resurgence in the mid-80s, though, with the Highwaymen, that supergroup with Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Chris Christopherson.
That was a smart move, capitalizing on the collective star power of the outlaw legends. They had 3 successful albums, but this decade also saw a terrible personal setback for him, a severe relapse into addiction.
And it was triggered by one of the most bizarre incidents in his life. We have to talk about the ostrich attack.
It sounds like fiction, but it's true. In 1983, Cash kept exotic animals on his farm, and he was kicked and seriously wounded by a male ostrich.
The injury to his abdomen was so severe, he needed major surgery.
And it was the prescribed painkillers for that injury that sent him right back into a cycle of amphetamine dependency.
He had been managing for over a decade, and this physical trauma just reopened the door to addiction.
It's heartbreaking. He was fighting a real physiological need for pain relief, but that same relief triggered the craving for the drugs that had almost killed him in the 60s.
But his resolve was strengthened by the experience. When he had double bypass heart surgery in 1988, he bravely refused to take prescription painkillers afterward. He was terrified of relapsing again.
During this time, he also turned to writing. He published his only novel, Man in White, in 1986. It's about the Apostle Paul, a clear sign of where his mind and his spirit were focused, even as his career was declining.
That commercial slump eventually led to him leaving Columbia Records. His career seemed to be drifting until the 1990s, and a partnership that would completely resurrect him, the collaboration with producer Rick Rubin.
This was a brilliant move. Creatively inspired, commercially risky. Cash signs with Rubin's label, American Recordings, which was known for hard rock and rap. The pairing seemed completely illogical.
But their first album, American Recordings in 1994, was revolutionary. It was just Cash's voice and his acoustic guitar, recorded mostly in his living room.
It had this raw vulnerability that younger audiences just connected with immediately. The album won a Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album, And his performance at the Glastonbury Festival that year introduced him to a whole new generation.
The follow-up, Unchained, featured Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and won the Best Country Album Grammy, proving he was relevant across all genres again.
But the peak of this late career triumph was American the Fourth. The Man Comes Around in 2002. This is the one that solidified his reputation as an interpretive master.
And we absolutely have to discuss his cover of the Nine Inch Nails song Hurt.
It's a piece of art that stands completely on its own. Trent Reznor, who wrote the original, was pretty skeptical when he first heard Cash was covering his intensely dark industrial song.
But Reznor's reaction, moving from skepticism to being profoundly moved, says it all. Cash took this song about self-harm and regret and turned it into a devastating meditation on aging, faith, and loss.
And the video that went with it, directed by Mark Romanisic, just cemented its legacy. It's this juxtaposition of the frail, elderly Cash with these powerful, haunting images from his long career.
The video won a Grammy. The emotional impact was so huge that at the 2003 MTV Video Music Awards, when Justin Timberlake won, he said that Cash deserved the award more, calling his own win a travesty.
The cover just transcended music. It became this cultural statement on mortality.
But this professional high point was happening as his health was declining drastically. In 1997, he was diagnosed with what they first thought was Scheidegger syndrome, a neurodegenerative disease.
It was later corrected to autonomic neuropathy, related to his diabetes. But whatever the label, it was debilitating. It forced him to stop touring. He was incredibly frail.
And through all this, June was his anchor, more essential than ever. When she died on May 15, 2003, it was a massive, devastating blow.
You can feel the intensity of his grief. Rick Rubin said that Cash felt his only reason left for living was the music. He told Rubin, "You have to keep me working because I will die if I don't have something to do."
And in the last 4 months of his life, he showed this incredible fortitude. He recorded 60 new songs.
His final public performance was just profoundly moving. On July 5, 2003, before he sang Ring of Fire, he read a statement to the audience. He said, "The spirit of June Carter overshadows me tonight to give me courage and inspiration like she always has. I thank God for June Carter. I love her with all my heart."
An extraordinary final dedication. His very last recordings were made on August 21st. Less than 4 months after losing June, John R. Cash died on September 12, 2003 at 71.
Johnny Cash's life, it was marked by this immense struggle and ultimate redemption, and that has ensured his cultural footprint is just enduring. He wrote over 1,000 songs, merging country, rock and roll, blues, folk, and gospel.
That Halls of Fame status is the proof of his crossover genius. He's in that very rare group of artists in both the country and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But his influence went beyond just his own music.
Absolutely. His support for Bob Dylan in the mid-60s was pivotal. When Dylan was facing resistance for going electric, Cash publicly defended him and collaborated with him. He helped legitimize that experimental phase for Dylan.
And the honors continue to this day. The Johnny Cash Trail in Folsom, California, has public art dedicated to telling his story and his connection to the prison.
And in one of the most fitting homages, a new species of large black tarantula found near Folsom Prison was named a Phonopelma Johnny Cashi in his honor in 2015.
His boyhood home in Dyess, Arkansas has been restored and is now a National Register of Historic Places site.
And of course, his life was dramatized in the 2005 film Walk the Line. Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon won Oscars for their performances, which just shows the power of his story.
Cash always resisted being put in a box. He said he was the biggest sinner of them all, even while being a devout Christian. He never wanted to be categorized. His whole life was this tug of war between the darkness of addiction and the light of faith.
And that tension is why his music is still so relevant. You find his influence everywhere, from Christian punk bands to U2. Which brings up a final question for you to consider. Is it precisely his refusal to fit neatly into any single box, morally, politically, or musically, that really cements his status as the philosopher prince of American country music?
That honesty, the open struggle, that might be his ultimate gift.
This exploration has just confirmed that Johnny Cash's career wasn't a straight line. It was an immense, messy, beautiful story of sorrow, tribulation, and extraordinary redemption.
His legacy is secured not just by his hits, but by his willingness to use his fame for a moral purpose, standing up for prisoners, advocating for Native Americans, or just providing dignity to the working man. We really encourage you to explore his work, especially his concept albums like Bitter Tears. They remind us of the activist core of the Man in Black.
Thank you for joining us for this analysis of a truly remarkable life.
Thanks for listening.